My grandfather was a famous chef who owned 12 fancy restaurants around the country. He always wore his white chef hat and told me amazing stories about cooking for movie stars. When he got sick and died, I thought he would leave me something special because we spent every Saturday together making cookies. But when the lawyers came to read his papers, they said Grandpa never wrote down who should get what. So everything went to my dad instead. 3 days later, Dad fired me from working at Grandpa's main restaurant and gave my job to my older brother Tommy, who can barely make toast without burning it. I lost the person I loved most and my dream job all at once. But then on a stormy Tuesday night, someone knocked on my door. It was an old woman with silver hair, carrying a mysterious envelope. She looked me right in the eyes and said something that made my heart skip a beat. "Your grandfather left this for you. He knew this day would come." My hand shook as I took the envelope, wondering what secrets it might hold. "Hello, I'm Sam Chun, and I'm 28 years old. I live in Seattle, Washington, a city full of tall buildings and coffee shops. Seattle has lots of rain, but I always loved watching the drops at my window while I worked. My life was never boring, but not because of the city. It was because of my family and all the problems we had. People always thought we were lucky because we had money, but money can't fix everything. My family owned a chain of fancy restaurants called Golden Dragon. The name sounded important, but inside our family, there were lots of fights and hurt feelings that never got better. The person who started it all was my grandfather, Master Chin Wei. He came to America with just $5 in his pocket and a dream to cook amazing food. He was short but strong, with kind eyes that sparkled when he smiled. As a little boy, I would sit in his big kitchen watching him flip vegetables in a hot pan while he told me stories about his childhood in China. He would say, "Sammy, cooking is like painting with food. You must put your heart into every dish." Those words stayed with me like a warm hug that never went away. After coming to America, Grandpa built Golden Dragon from nothing. He started with one tiny restaurant in a basement where he worked 18 hours every day. He didn't just want to make money. He wanted to share his love of food with everyone. Every recipe was perfect. Every customer felt like family. He always said, "Good food brings people together like magic." He wasn't just a businessman. He was like a teacher who showed me how to care about others through cooking. I was closer to Grandpa than anyone else in my family. My mom worked far away as a doctor, and my dad, Robertson, was always too busy counting money to spend time with us. Dad was smart about business, but he didn't care about the heart of cooking like Grandpa did. He loved expensive cars and big parties where he could show off. To him, Golden Dragon wasn't about making people happy with food. It was just a way to get rich and powerful. Then there's Tommy, my older brother who's 2 years older than me. Sometimes I think he acts like a baby even though he's 30. Tommy is just like Dad. He wants attention and fancy things, but doesn't want to work hard for them. He had a job at one of our restaurants, pretending to be a manager, but everyone knew he just played games on his phone all day. He couldn't cook, he couldn't lead people, and the only thing he was good at was telling Dad how wonderful Dad was. I was different from them. Growing up with Grandpa taught me that work should make you proud, not just rich. When I finished college, Grandpa called me into his office. It was a simple room with wooden walls and a picture of his first restaurant. "Sammy," he said, "I want you to help me keep our family's cooking dreams alive. Not for money, but for love." That day, he made me the head chef of our biggest restaurant when I was only 23 years old. I worked like my life depended on it because I wanted to make Grandpa proud. I learned how to create new recipes, work with food suppliers, and make customers smile. Some nights, I slept on a little couch in the kitchen because I was working so late. I remember one time when a food critic from a famous magazine came to eat at our restaurant. I spent 3 days creating a special meal just for him. And when he wrote that we had the best Chinese food in the city, Grandpa gave me the biggest hug ever. He said, "I'm so proud of you, Sammy. You understand what cooking really means." But life was never as easy as I hoped it would be. Under all the smiles and success, my family was falling apart. Dad cared more about his bank account than about our restaurants. Tommy spent money on expensive clothes and cars while depending on the family name. I tried to keep everything working well to protect what Grandpa had built, But I didn't know a big storm was coming that would destroy everything I cared about. Everything started falling apart on a cold morning in March when the rain was hitting Seattle extra hard. I was in the kitchen trying out a new soup recipe when my phone rang. It was Maria, Grandpa's housekeeper, and her voice was shaking. "Sam, you need to come to the hospital right now. Master Chin is very sick." My heart felt like it stopped beating. I dropped my soup ladle and ran out of the kitchen, driving through the wet streets as fast as I could. When I got to the hospital, Grandpa was lying in a white bed looking very tired, but his eyes still had that same kind look. The doctor said his heart was too weak, and he didn't have much time left. I held his warm hand and tried not to cry. "Sammy," he whispered in a voice that was soft but clear, "remember everything I taught you. Don't let them take away our dream." I nodded, even though I didn't understand what he meant. Who were they, and what dream was he talking about? Grandpa died that night when he was 81 years old. I sat next to his bed listening to the machines get quiet, feeling like my whole world was crashing down. I didn't cry right away because the sadness was too big to understand. Grandpa wasn't just my teacher. He was like my real father and my best friend all rolled into one. He was the light that showed me which way to go in life. Now that light was gone, and I felt lost in the dark. His funeral happened 5 days later, and it was huge because everyone in Seattle knew Master Chin Wei. Restaurant owners, food writers, customers who had eaten at Golden Dragon for years, and even some famous chefs from TV all came to say goodbye. The funeral home was full of flowers that smelled sweet and cards with nice words. I wore my best black suit and tried to look calm, but inside I felt like I was drowning. Every handshake and every sorry for your loss reminded me that Grandpa was really gone forever. My dad, Robert, showed up looking perfect, as always in an expensive suit with his hair combed just right. He shook hands with important people and said thank you with a fake smile, but I could see in his eyes that he wasn't really sad. To him, the funeral was just something he had to do, a chance to meet business people who might help him later. My brother Tommy was even worse. He came late, wearing a wrinkled shirt, and spent most of the time looking at his phone, only talking when someone rich or famous came over. I watched them both and felt like we weren't even family anymore. They don't get it, I thought. They don't understand what losing Grandpa really means. In the days after the funeral, I tried to go back to work in the kitchen, but nothing felt right. The Golden Dragon restaurant that used to make me so happy now felt empty and cold. Then came the day when the lawyers would tell us about Grandpa's money and restaurants. 1 week after we buried him. I didn't expect much because I thought Grandpa had everything planned out already. He had told me many times that I would take over the restaurants one day, not because I was his grandson, but because he trusted me to keep cooking with love. "Sammy," he said during one of our Saturday cookie-making days, "I didn't build these restaurants to make lots of money. I built them to make people happy, and I want you to keep doing that." I believed him and thought his important papers would show that. We all met at the lawyer's office in a cold room with dark walls that smelled like old books. Dad sat at the big table looking confident, like he already knew what was going to happen. Tommy sat next to him playing with an expensive pen and acting like he didn't care. I sat across from them trying to stay calm, even though my heart was beating fast like a drum. The lawyer, Mr. Williams, was a skinny man with thick glasses who walked in carrying a stack of papers. He looked around the room with sad eyes, and I got a bad feeling in my stomach. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Williams said in a flat voice like he was reading from a boring book, "I'm sorry to tell you that Master Chin Wei did not leave behind any written instructions about who should get what." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. No written instructions? That was impossible. Grandpa was so careful about everything, especially important things like this. I looked at Dad, and the mean smile on his face made me feel sick. Tommy looked up from his pen with eyes that sparkled like he had just won the lottery. "Without written instructions," Mr. Williams continued, "all of Master Chen's restaurants and money will go to his son according to the law. That means everything goes to Mr. Robert Chun." Dad stood up and clapped his hands like he had just finished a successful business meeting. "Thank you, Mr. Williams," he said with a voice full of pride. "I'll make sure my father's restaurants are taken care of properly." He turned to look at me with a smile that was cold as ice. Sam, you've worked hard, but I think it's time our family went in a new direction. I couldn't say anything. I felt frozen. In my head, I could hear Grandpa's voice talking about love, dreams, and cooking with your heart. But now those words felt like something from a fairy tale that wasn't real. I left the lawyer's office and walked out into Seattle's cold streets, feeling like I had lost not just Grandpa, but my whole life. The next day, Dad called a big meeting at Golden Dragon's main restaurant. I went even though I knew nothing good would happen. In front of all the managers and workers, he announced that he would be in charge of everything now. He talked about new plans and changes that were needed, but I knew it was all just for show. Then he put his hand on Tommy's shoulder and said that Tommy would replace me as head chef. He's the future of this family, Dad said with his voice full of fake pride. Tommy grinned like he had just been crowned king of the world. And then, like a final stab to my heart, Dad looked right at me. Sam, you've done good work, but we don't need you anymore. The whole room went quiet. I felt everyone staring at me with looks of pity and awkwardness. I wanted to yell that I had worked so hard to keep the restaurants running when times were tough, that these were Grandpa's restaurants, not his. But I said nothing. I stood up, walked out of the meeting room, and left a building that used to feel like home. Rain was falling hard, and cold drops hit my face as I stepped onto the Seattle streets. I didn't have an umbrella or a jacket, just my chef uniform that was getting soaked. I walked around the city without knowing where I was going. Each step felt heavier, like I was carrying the weight of a world that had just been destroyed. Golden Dragon wasn't just my job. It was my dream, the promise I spent years trying to keep for Grandpa, and now it had been stolen by my own family. The days that followed passed in a blur of sadness. I went back to my small apartment, a place I had rarely spent time in before, because work kept me so busy. Now it felt like a prison where I was trapped with thoughts I couldn't escape. I lay on my couch staring at the ceiling, trying to find a reason to get up each morning. But all I felt was emptiness. Grandpa was gone, the restaurant were lost, and family, the thing Grandpa always told me was most important, now felt like a bad joke. Money started running out quickly. I wasn't someone who spent lots of money on silly things, but my savings weren't enough to last forever, especially without a job. I applied to work at other restaurants in Seattle, but each time I got polite letters saying no thank you. An old friend who worked at a big restaurant chain sent me a text message. Sam, I hate to tell you this, but people are saying your dad is telling lies about you to other restaurant owners. He has a lot of power, you know. Reading that message felt like getting punched in the chest. Dad hadn't just fired me. He was making sure I could never get another cooking job. I started taking any work I could find just to pay for food and rent. I delivered pizzas in my old car, cleaned office buildings at night, and even worked as a cashier at a grocery store. These jobs didn't use my cooking skills and didn't make me feel proud, but they helped me survive. Every day I woke up, put on whatever work clothes I needed, and told myself it was only temporary. One evening, Tommy called and invited me to a family party at Dad's big house. I decided to go because I wanted to face both of them and show that I was still standing strong. The party was at Dad's mansion outside Seattle, a place so fancy it made me feel like I didn't belong there. Expensive paintings covered the walls. Crystal lights made everything sparkle, and rich people laughed loudly while holding wine glasses. I wore a simple button-up shirt, the nicest thing I had left, and walked in feeling like a stranger. Tommy was the star of the party, as usual. He stood in the middle of a crowd bragging about a new menu he created for Golden Dragon, even though I knew the real chefs had done all the work. The guests clapped and raised their glasses to toast him, and Tommy smiled like he really deserved all the praise. Dad stood next to him, patting his back, with eyes full of pride. I stood in a corner, holding a glass of water, trying to ignore the pitying looks from people who used to respect me. Then Tommy saw me, and his smile turned mean and sharp. Sam, he called out loud enough for everyone to hear, his voice full of mockery. I didn't think you'd show up here. I heard you're delivering pizzas now. How fitting for someone who used to think he was such a great chef. The whole room burst into laughter, and I felt my face turn red with embarrassment. I wanted to tell him that at least I earned my money through honest work, unlike him who just lived off Dad's success. But I stayed quiet, squeezing my water glass so tight I thought it might break. Dad walked over, put his hand on Tommy's shoulder, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't worry about him, Tommy. Your brother is just trying to find his place in the world. You, on the other hand, are the real future of this family. Everything, the restaurants, this house, the boat, will all be yours someday." Those words cut deeper than when he first fired me. I looked at Dad, searching for any sign of family love, but all I saw was cold arrogance. I left the party early, without saying goodbye to anyone. On the drive home, I stopped at a small park, sat on a wooden bench, and let myself remember all the good times with Grandpa. I thought about the evenings we spent together talking about how food could make people happy, about how a person should always stand up for what's right no matter how hard life gets. "Good things always find a way to come back," he once told me. I wondered if that was really true. Right now, after losing everything, good things felt like an impossible dream. But then a few weeks later, I heard something that made my heart race. An old friend who used to work at the lawyer's office called me. "Sam," he said quietly, like he was afraid someone might hear him, "there are rumors going around that Masterton did write down his wishes, but the papers disappeared." I sat up straight, my heart pounding like a drum. Written wishes? If that was true, why did Mr. Williams say there weren't any? And how could important papers just disappear? I started thinking about everything that had happened, remembering Grandpa's words, Dad's cold looks, and Tommy's happy smile. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones. I began searching through my memories of Grandpa, looking for any clue he might have left behind. He was so careful about everything important. If he had written down his wishes, he would have made sure they were safe. I decided to visit Rosa, Grandpa's housekeeper, the only person in the family I still trusted. She welcomed me into her small house on the edge of town, where she lived after stopping work for Grandpa. She made me a cup of tea with shaking hands and looked at me with worried eyes. "Sam," she said, "I don't know everything, but Masterton once told me he had plans to leave something special for you when he died. He didn't trust your father, and he was worried things wouldn't happen the way he wanted. Then where are his written wishes?" I asked, my voice full of desperation. If Grandpa had written something down, why did it disappear? Rosa shook her head sadly. "I don't know, but Masterton was very smart. If he wanted you to have something, he would have found a way to make sure you got it." I left Rosa's house with a tiny bit of hope, but also feeling more worried than ever. If there were written wishes, and they had been hidden, who was behind it? Dad? Mr. Williams, the lawyer? Or maybe both of them working together? I had no proof, no clues, only a gut feeling that something dark and wrong was happening in my family. That Tuesday night in Seattle was colder than usual. The wind was blowing through the empty streets, carrying the sharp chill that comes before winter. I drove back to my apartment with my mind spinning, trying to put together pieces of memories about Grandpa and looking for any sign or hint he might have left behind. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was lost in a maze with walls too high to see over. The days that followed felt like living in a shadow. I kept working my pizza delivery job, driving an old car down wet roads, carrying food to people I didn't know. Every time I stopped at a restaurant, I looked at the busy kitchens, and my heart hurt. They reminded me of Golden Dragon, of the days when I stood over hot stoves creating dishes with pride, knowing I was keeping Grandpa's dream alive. But then on a Friday evening when I was tired and soaked in the rain, everything changed completely. I had just finished delivering pizzas and was exhausted from being out in the rain all day. I stopped at a small diner on the edge of town, a place where I often went for cheap coffee and to watch cars drive by. The diner was almost empty with just a few people scattered around, and yellow lights cast long shadows on the worn walls. I sat in a corner booth sipping lukewarm coffee when the door opened and someone walked in. She looked like she was in her 70s, short and thin, wearing a faded purple coat with buttons missing. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes were sharp and knowing, like they had seen many secrets. She looked around the diner, then walked straight to my table like she knew exactly who I was. A chill ran down my back. Something about this woman made me nervous, not scared exactly, but like she was carrying news that would change everything. Sam Chun? She asked, her voice soft but strong like she'd been a teacher once. I nodded, holding my coffee cup tightly. I'm Mrs. Liu, she said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from me. I was your grandfather's friend from the old neighborhood where he first started cooking. I blinked, trying to remember. Grandpa had told me stories about the Chinese community where he learned to cook, but he rarely talked about specific people from those days. You knew my grandfather? I asked carefully. Mrs. Liu nodded and pulled a thick white envelope from her coat pocket. She slid across the table, her eyes never leaving mine. Open it, she said, but not here. At home when you're alone. And be very careful, Sam. There are people who don't want you to see what's inside. I stared at the envelope, my heart beating so fast I thought everyone could hear it. The envelope felt light, but somehow heavy at the same time, like it contained a secret that could change my whole life. Why are you giving me this? I asked, keeping my voice low. And why now? Mrs. Liu sighed and looked out the window, like she was checking to see if anyone was watching us. Your grandfather was like a brother to me, she said. We both came to America with nothing, and we helped each other survive. Before he died, he asked me to do something very important. He said if anything bad happened to him, I should find you and give you this envelope personally. A cold feeling went through my whole body. What kind of bad thing? I asked, my voice shaking even though I was trying to stay calm. Mrs. Liu leaned forward and spoke urgently. Your grandfather didn't trust his lawyer, Mr. Williams. He thought his written wishes might be destroyed or hidden, so he made copies and gave them to me for safekeeping. But after he died, scary men came looking for me. They threatened to hurt me and told me to burn anything connected to your grandfather. My head was spinning like a carnival ride. Who's behind this? I asked, even though part of me already suspected the answer. Mrs. Liu looked me straight in the eyes with a serious expression. Your father? I can't prove it completely, but I know the type of man he is. He has money and connections, and he wanted everything for himself. Your grandfather told me that Robert never understood what the restaurants really meant. He was afraid Robert would destroy everything, and he wanted you to protect the family dream. I gripped the envelope, so tightly my knuckles turned white. Why didn't you come sooner? I asked, feeling frustrated and sad at the same time. My grandfather has been gone for months. I've lost everything. Mrs. Liu shook her head, her eyes full of regret. I want to come earlier, Sam, but those men were watching me. I had to wait until I was sure I wouldn't lead them to you. I've been living with my sister in another state, moving around to stay safe. She stood up and pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. Be careful, Sam, she said one more time. The people behind this won't stop with just threats. They'll do anything to keep their secrets hidden. Then she walked out of the diner, leaving me with a slip of paper that had her phone number and the envelope that felt like it was burning in my hands. I drove back to my apartment as fast as I could, locked the door tight, and closed all the curtains. It was late at night, with only the sound of rain tapping against my window. I sat at my kitchen table with the envelope in front of me, my heart pounding like I was about to jump off a cliff. Inside the envelope were 4 things that would change my life forever. A copy of Grandpa's real wishes written on official paper, a letter written in his handwriting, a small computer memory stick, and an old photograph of Grandpa and Mrs. Liu standing together outside his first restaurant. I read the official papers first. They were typed neatly with Grandpa's signature and a special seal from a notary. The words were crystal clear. Grandpa wanted me to have all his restaurants, his house by the lake, his savings account, and even his collection of antique cooking pots worth over $50,000. He wrote a special note, saying I should keep the family's cooking tradition alive with honesty and love. I read it over and over again, tears falling onto the paper like raindrops. Grandpa had kept his promise to me even after he died. Next, I opened a letter written in his shaky but strong handwriting. Sam, it began, if you're reading this, then something has gone very wrong. I trust you more than anyone, but I don't trust the people around you. Remember everything I taught you about standing up for what's right, and don't let them steal what belongs to you. I have always been proud of you, and I always will be. I put my head down on the table and cried, feeling like Grandpa was sitting right next to me. Finally, I put the memory stick into my computer. A sound file appeared on the screen. I clicked on it, and Grandpa's voice filled my quiet apartment, weak from being sick, but still determined and strong. Sam, if you're hearing this, then I'm not there to protect you anymore. I wrote down my wishes, but I'm worried they won't reach you safely. Mr. Williams, a lawyer, can't be trusted, and I'm afraid your father will do terrible things to get control of the restaurants. I gave copies to Mrs. Liu, my oldest friend in America. If something happens to my original papers, find Mrs. Liu. She promised to help you. The recording ended, and I sat there frozen in my chair, feeling like the whole world had been turned upside down. I didn't sleep at all that night. I walked around my apartment holding the envelope, with Mrs. Liu's words echoing in my head. Dad was the one behind everything. The missing papers, the threats to Mrs. Liu, probably even the lies he told to keep me from getting other cooking jobs. But how could I prove it? The copies of Grandpa's wishes, his letter, and the recording were important. But would they be enough to fight against Dad and Mr. Williams? These were men with lots of money and power, who knew how to twist the truth to get what they wanted. I thought about Mrs. Liu and what she had suffered, living in fear and hiding just to keep her promise to Grandpa. I felt deep respect for her, but also fear. If Dad really did hire scary men to threaten her, what would he do to me? I looked out my window at the city lights, blinking in the rain like stars. I couldn't see the future clearly, but I knew the road ahead would be dangerous and difficult. There was a darkness hiding in my family, and I had to be very careful. One mistake could cost me everything, maybe even my life. I knew I couldn't fight this battle by myself. The copies of Grandpa's wishes were real and had his signature, but they were just pieces of paper, without legal power. Grandpa's letter and recording were important clues, but they weren't enough to win against people like Dad. I needed someone who understood the law, someone brave enough to help me turn these clues into weapons I could fight back. That's why I looked for Jennifer Martinez, a lawyer who specialized in family disputes and wills. She was known for being tough and, more importantly, she wasn't afraid to take on rich and powerful people who thought they were above the law. I arranged to meet Jennifer at her office in downtown Seattle, a modern building with glass walls that looked out over the busy streets below. When I walked in, Jennifer stood up from behind her desk and shook my hand with a firm grip. She was about 45 with black hair streaked with silver, dressed in a navy blue suit. What impressed me most was the confidence in her voice and movements, not the show-off arrogance of my dad, but the quiet strength of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Sit down, Sam," she said in a clear, strong voice. "You said you have something important to show me. I'm listening." I placed the envelope on her desk and pulled out the copies of Grandpa's wishes, the handwritten letter, and the memory stick with the recording. I told her everything. Grandpa's death, Mr. Williams claiming there were no written wishes, Dad firing me and giving my job to Tommy, and my meeting with Mrs. Liu. Jennifer listened without interrupting, sometimes nodding or writing notes on a yellow pad. When I finished talking, she picked up the copies of Grandpa's wishes and read every line carefully, then listened to the recording through small headphones. She was quiet for a long time, and I felt like my entire future depended on what she would say next. Finally, Jennifer leaned back in her chair, took off her reading glasses, and looked at me with serious eyes. "Sam, I'm going to be completely honest with you," she said. "What you have here is very important, but it's not enough by itself to win a case against someone like your father. These copies of your grandfather's wishes are valuable evidence, but we need to prove that the original papers were deliberately hidden or destroyed. The recording and letter help tell the story, but we need harder evidence, like proof that your father paid money to bribe Mr. Williams or anyone else involved in making the papers disappear." I nodded, feeling a small flame of hope starting to grow in my chest. "So, what do I do next?" I asked. Jennifer smiled, not a fake smile, but a real one full of determination. "We start investigating like detectives. You need to find anyone who worked with Mr. Williams, especially people who might know what happened to the original papers. I'll handle the legal side and prepare our strategy for court. But Sam, you need to be very careful. If your father is really behind all this, he won't just sit back and let you dig around for evidence. He'll try to stop you. I left Jennifer's office feeling like I had found a light at the end of a very dark tunnel. Nothing was solved yet, but at least I had a plan and someone on my side who knew how to fight. I started by contacting Maria Santos, who used to work as a secretary at Mr. Williams' law office. I knew her from the times I had visited with Grandpa, and she had always been kind to me, though she seemed scared of her boss. I sent her a careful text message asking if we could meet at a quiet cafe outside the city where not many people would recognize us. Maria arrived looking nervous, constantly glancing around like she expected someone to jump out and catch her doing something wrong. "Sam," she said in a whisper, I don't know if I should be talking to you about this, but because I respected your grandfather so much, I'll tell you what I know." She took a deep breath like she was getting ready to jump into cold water. "I saw your grandfather's real wishes, Sam. They were kept in Mr. Williams' special safe. I didn't read all the details, but I saw your name and your grandfather's signature. My blood felt like it had turned to ice. Are you sure, Maria?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded, her eyes full of fear. "I don't have proof, Sam, but I know Mr. Williams isn't honest. And your father came to our office several times before those papers disappeared. I don't know what they talked about, but I saw them whispering in the conference room, and Mr. Williams looked very stressed afterward." I thanked Maria and promised to keep our meeting secret, then left with another piece of the puzzle. The original papers had existed, and they had been taken on purpose. But how could I prove it? I knew I was playing a dangerous game now, and I needed to be more careful than ever before. Meanwhile, rumors started spreading around the city. I heard that Dad and Tommy were telling people I was trying to sue my own family to steal money that wasn't mine. The lies made me angry, but I wasn't surprised. Dad had always been good at making people believe whatever story helped him the most. I tried not to let it bother me, but then scary things started happening. One evening, as I left the grocery store after my cashier's shift, I noticed a man standing under a streetlight across from my apartment building. He wore a dark jacket with the hood pulled up, and even though I couldn't see his face clearly, I felt his eyes watching me. I pretended not to notice and walked quickly inside, but my heart was racing like I had just run a marathon. A few days later, I saw a black car parked near the pizza place where I worked. The driver never got out, but I could feel him staring at me through the dark windows. I started checking my locks twice every night and keeping my curtains closed, but the feeling of being watched never went away. It was like having a shadow that followed me everywhere, making even simple things like going to the store feel dangerous. I called Mrs. Liu using the phone number she had given me. We arranged to meet at a small park early in the morning, when fog still covered Seattle like a gray blanket. Mrs. Liu appeared looking more tired than before, like the months of hiding and worrying were wearing her down. "You're being followed, aren't you?" she asked as soon as she sat on the bench next to me. I nodded and told her about the man under the streetlight and the black car. Mrs. Liu sighed, her eyes full of worry. "Sam, I warned you. Your father hired people to scare me away, and he won't think twice about doing the same thing to you. You're asking the right questions, but you need to be very careful. Don't let them know you have copies of your grandfather's wishes." A chill went through my whole body like cold water. "I need proof," I said. "Jennifer, my lawyer, says if I can find evidence that Dad paid Mr. Williams or those scary men, we could win in court." Mrs. Liu nodded thoughtfully. "I don't have direct proof, but I know your father. He always leaves traces of his dirty work, no matter how clever he thinks he's being. You should find a good private investigator, someone who knows how to dig up secrets without being noticed." I followed Mrs. Liu's advice and reached out to David Kim, a private investigator who specialized in complicated financial cases. David was a short man with sharp eyes and a quiet confidence that came from seeing too many dark secrets in his work. I gave him all the information I had, including my suspicions about Dad and Mr. Williams. "What exactly do you want to find?" David asked while sipping black coffee from a paper cup. "Money transactions," I said. "Any large amounts my dad took out or move around, especially near the time when Grandpa died. If he paid to hide those papers or hire scary men to threaten people, I need to know about it." David nodded. Give me 1 week. But Sam, if your father's really behind this, you need to prepare yourself. He won't give up easily. 7 days later, David called me to meet at a small restaurant on the outskirts of town. He was sitting in a corner booth with a stack of papers in front of him that looked like treasure to me. I found what you need, he said, sliding the documents toward me with a serious expression. Your father, Robert Chen, took out 3 large cash amounts from his personal bank account, one right after your grandfather died, and 2 more in the following months. All cash withdrawals with no clear explanations, but the timing and amount suggest payments to a corrupt lawyer and hired muscle. I read through the papers with my heart pounding like a drum. The transactions were clear as daylight. $40,000 in March, $25,000 in April, and $30,000 in May. No names of who received the money, but the timing made it almost certain they were connected to Mr. Williams and the men who had threatened Mrs. Liu. Thank you, David, I said, my voice shaking with excitement and fear. This is exactly what I needed. David looked at me with grave eyes. Sam, you're playing with fire now. These bank records are just the beginning. If your father knows you're digging into his business, you're in real danger. Get these documents to your lawyer immediately and move fast. I drove back to my apartment, clutching the papers like they were made of gold and dynamite at the same time. For the first time in months, I felt close to the truth, but with that feeling came growing fear. If Dad was willing to hire thugs to silence Mrs. Liu, what would he do to his own son? That evening after returning from a pizza delivery, I discovered something that made my blood freeze in my veins. My old car parked in the lot near my apartment had been destroyed. The tires were slashed, the windows were smashed, and someone had scratched a message into the paint with a sharp object. Stop digging. I stood there feeling like someone had poured ice water over my head. This wasn't random vandalism by teenagers. This was a clear warning, and I knew exactly who it came from. I called David immediately, my voice trembling as I described what happened to my car. Sam, you need to get out of your apartment tonight. David said over the phone, his tone deadly serious. The people who did this aren't playing games anymore. I'll keep investigating, but you need to stay somewhere safe. Don't go anywhere alone after dark. I nodded even though he couldn't see me and hung up, feeling like the walls were closing around me. A few days later, someone slipped an envelope under my apartment door while I was sleeping. I found it in the morning and opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single piece of paper with words cut out from magazines and pasted together. Leave town or else. No signature, no return address, but the message was as clear as a fire alarm. Dad, or someone working for him, wanted me gone, not just in the restaurant business, but from Seattle entirely. They wanted to erase me like I had never existed. I sat on my kitchen floor holding a threatening note, feeling anger and fear fighting inside my chest like 2 wild animals. But I couldn't give up now, not when I had evidence, not when I had hope for the first time since Grandpa died. I started changing all my routines to stay safe. I took different routes to work, stopped going to my usual places, and constantly looked over my shoulder when I went outside. But no matter how careful I was, I still felt invisible eyes watching my every move. Then one evening as I sat in my apartment drinking cold coffee and staring at the stack of evidence, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Meet me at Murphy's Diner, 9 p.m. It's about your father. I read it over and over, my heart pounding like a bass drum. This could be a trap. Mrs. Liu had warned me about the people working for Dad, and I knew they wouldn't hesitate to lure me somewhere dark and dangerous. But what if it was real? What if someone had more clues that could help me win this fight? I couldn't pass up the chance, no matter how risky it seemed. I arrived at Murphy's Diner, a small place on the edge of town, where the lighting was dim and the smell of old grease hung in the air like a cloud. I chose a table near the back exit, in case I needed to run quickly. The clock on the wall showed 8:55, and I sat there gripping my phone, watching the door like a hawk watching for prey. At exactly 9 o'clock, someone walked in wearing a baseball cap pulled low over their face. I tensed up, ready to bolt for the door, but then the person pulled off the cap, and I nearly fell out of my chair. It was Tommy, my older brother. Tommy looked completely different from the cocky, arrogant person I knew. His eyes were red like he'd been crying, his hair was messy, and his hands shook as he slid into the seat across from me. "Sam," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to talk to you about something important." I stared at him, every muscle in my body tense. "What's this about, Tommy?" I asked coldly. "Did Dad send you to trick me?" Tommy shook his head quickly, his eyes showing a fear I had never seen before. "No, Sam, I swear on Grandpa's grave. I'm here because I can't keep pretending anymore." He pulled a folder of papers from his jacket and pushed them toward me with trembling fingers. "Look at these." I took the papers carefully, my heart racing like a motorcycle engine. They were printed emails between Dad and Mr. Williams, and each line felt like a punch to my stomach. Words like "final payment," "make sure the kid disappears," and "handle this permanently" jumped off the pages like poisonous snakes. One email from Dad made my blood run cold. The boy's getting too close. Time to take care of him like we discussed. "Tommy," I said, my voice shaking like a leaf in the wind, "where did you get these?" Tommy put his head in his hands like he was carrying the weight of the world. "I took them from Dad's computer," he said. "I know you probably hate me, but I overheard Dad talking to Mr. Williams about hurting you if you didn't stop asking questions. I don't want anything bad to happen to you, Sam." I studied his face, looking for any sign that this was another lie or trick. Tommy had laughed at me, taking my job, and stood by while Dad destroyed my life. How could I trust him now after everything he had done? But his voice was shaking with real emotion, and for the first time I saw not the spoiled brat from the family party, but a scared older brother who realized he had made terrible mistakes. "Why, Tommy?" I asked, my voice getting softer. "Why help me now after you took Dad's side?" Tommy looked up with tears in his eyes that reflected the diner's dim lights. "Because I was wrong about everything, Sam. I thought Dad was doing what was best for our family, but he only cares about money and power. He doesn't love us. We're just tools he uses to get what he wants. I don't want to lose you like we lost Grandpa. I know I've been a terrible brother, but I want to make things right between us. Please let me help you fight him." I didn't answer right away. I held the emails and read them again, realizing they matched perfectly with David's report about the cash withdrawals. The $40,000 right after Grandpa's death, probably to pay Mr. Williams to hide the real papers. The other amounts later, likely to hire the men who threatened Mrs. Liu and vandalized my car. Everything fit together like pieces of a puzzle that showed a picture I didn't want to see, but couldn't deny. "All right," I said finally, my voice dry as desert sand. "But if this is some kind of trap, Tommy, I'll never forgive you." Tommy nodded quickly, looking relieved but still anxious like he was carrying a heavy secret. "I'll keep watching Dad and listen to his phone calls," he said. "If I find more evidence, I'll get it to you safely. But you have to be super careful, Sam. Dad knows you're investigating, and he's planning something bad. He won't stop until you're gone forever." We left the diner, separately. Me first, Tommy a few minutes later. On the drive home through Seattle's rainy streets, I couldn't stop thinking about my brother. Was Tommy really sincere about helping me? Or was this another one of Dad's clever games to trick me? I wasn't completely sure, but I knew I didn't have many choices left. Tommy might have betrayed me before, but now he might be the only person who could help me get close enough to Dad to find the truth and bring him down. The next morning, I met Jennifer Martinez at her office, bringing everything I had collected like a detective bringing evidence to court. The copies of Grandpa's wishes, his handwritten letter, the memory stick with the recording, David's financial reports showing the suspicious cash withdrawals, and the emails Tommy had stolen from Dad's computer. Jennifer examined each document with the sharp focus of a hawk hunting prey, her eyes missing nothing important. "Sam," she said, closing the thick file with a satisfied expression, "this is enough evidence for us to file a petition with the probate court. We'll request to reopen your grandfather's inheritance case based on suspected fraud and document concealment. But you need to understand that this will be like going to war. Your father and Mr. Williams have a lot of money and influence, and they'll use every dirty trick they can think of to destroy you." I nodded, feeling a mix of determination and nervousness swirling in my stomach like a tornado. "I'm ready," I said, though part of me was still scared. "As long as we can get back what belongs to Grandpa's memory, I'll do whatever it takes to win." Jennifer smiled with the confidence of a general planning a successful battle. "Good. I'll prepare the lawsuit and file it with the court today. Get ready, Sam. Your father has lots of powerful friends, and he'll try every trick in his playbook to bring you down." Just like Jennifer had predicted, the response from Dad and Mr. Williams came like a hurricane hitting the coast. Only a few hours after the lawsuit was filed, I received a phone call from Dad. His voice through the phone was cold as winter ice, but I could hear the anger bubbling underneath like lava in a volcano. "Sam, what do you think you're doing?" he said in a voice that could freeze fire. "How dare you sue your own family, making up lies to ruin my reputation. You'll be sorry you ever started this fight." I didn't say anything back. I just hung up the phone, my heart beating like a drum in a marching band. Mr. Williams also fought back, giving a statement to the local newspaper claiming I was an ungrateful son trying to make up stories to steal money that didn't belong to me. The rumor spread through Seattle like wildfire, and I felt people staring at me with suspicious eyes when I walked down the street. But I didn't care anymore. I had lost too much to be afraid of what people whisper behind my back. The day of the first court hearing arrived, and I walked into the Seattle Probate Courthouse, feeling like I was entering a gladiator arena where only one fighter would walk out alive. The courtroom was cold with dark walls and an atmosphere so tense you could cut it with a knife. Dad sat on the other side dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than I made in 3 months, his face showing no emotion at all. Next to him was Mr. Williams, looking calm on the outside, but I could see his hands gripping each other tightly like he was trying to hide his nervousness. Tommy was in the courtroom, and I wonder if he was truly on my side like he had promised at the diner. The judge was a middle-aged woman with stern eyes that missed nothing and a voice that commanded respect from everyone in the room. She asked Jennifer to present our case first. Jennifer stood up, her voice ringing with strength and clarity that filled every corner of the courtroom. She argued that there was strong evidence suggesting my grandfather's original wishes had been deliberately hidden or destroyed by people who wanted to steal his legacy. She presented our evidence like a prosecutor building a case against dangerous criminals. The copies of Grandpa's wishes, his handwritten letter, the audio recording, Maria's testimony about seeing the original papers before they disappeared, and the emails Tommy had taken from Dad's computer. Each piece of evidence was like an arrow aimed directly at the hearts of Dad and Mr. Williams, showing their guilt for everyone in the courtroom to see. When it was Mr. Williams' turn to defend himself, he stood up slowly, adjusted his glasses with shaking fingers, and spoke in a voice that tried to sound calm but couldn't hide his fear. "Your Honor," he said like he was reading from a script, "I must state clearly that I never received any written wishes from Master Chin Wei. The documents presented by the plaintiff are just copies without legal power, and these accusations are completely made up to damage the reputation of a respected family." My blood boiled like water in a hot pot. He was lying as smoothly as a snake sliding through grass. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Even though Jennifer had told me to stay calm, I stood up from my seat. "Your Honor," I said, my voice shaking but strong with determination, "my grandfather was the most careful and honest man I ever knew. He didn't trust Mr. Williams, which is why he gave copies of his wishes to Mrs. Liu, his old friend. Mr. Williams is lying to this court, and I have the evidence to prove it." The entire courtroom fell silent like someone had pressed a mute button. All eyes turned to me, and the tension felt like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. Dad glared at me with eyes that could melt steel, but I stared right back at him without blinking. Jennifer continued by presenting David Kim's financial report, highlighting the 3 large cash withdrawals from Dad's bank account, $40,000, $25,000, and $30,000, all taken out around the times when Grandpa's papers disappeared, and Mrs. Liu was threatened by hired thugs. The evidence painted a clear picture of corruption and lies that even a blind person could see. I watched Mr. Williams as Jennifer spoke, and saw beads of sweat forming on his forehead like morning dew while his hands began to shake like leaves in a strong wind. Dad sat next to him, gripping his chair arms so tightly his knuckles turned white, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew I was fighting on the side of truth and justice. Then came the moment that would change everything. Jennifer called Mrs. Liu as our surprise witness. When the brave old woman entered the courtroom, my heart swelled with gratitude and respect. She looked older and more tired from months of hiding, but her eyes were as sharp and determined as a warrior's. She took the oath with a steady voice and began her testimony that would shake the foundation of Dad's lies. "I am Mrs. Liu," she said clearly, "and I was Master Chin Wei's closest friend for over 30 years. Before he died, he entrusted me with copies of his true wishes because he feared his son and lawyer would try to steal everything from Sam, the grandson who truly deserved to inherit the restaurants and continue the family tradition of cooking with love." Mrs. Liu's words hit the courtroom like a thunderbolt, and I felt the air itself change around us. Dad's confidence crumbled like a house made of cards, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw real fear in his eyes. Mr. Williams started muttering and tried to interrupt, but the judge firmly told him to be quiet and let the witness finish her testimony. The truth was finally coming out, and nothing could stop it now.